I didn't plan on being next to this when I wrote this, so this doesn't make sense. Because I was gonna let go, and there it is. Today, I want to share with you the grinder that I have chosen for myself at home. And I'm really excited about the technology that this grinder has. So here we have the new all ground from Fiorenzato. Now this grinder boasts a whole range of different features. You can grind espresso, mocha and filter very easily with an interactive digital display, with super easy cleaning of your burrs and a really easy grind chute which removes so you can clean it. It's been some time since technology has changed in the grinder market. And the engineers at Fiorenzato have redesigned the way that we make grind adjustments. It's just super clever. They have answered the #1 question that we get asked about coffee grinders from both the home and the commercial market. What grind number setting do I set my grinder on to get the best extraction? This is like the biggest can of worms question that makes me think, where do I start? What level of experience does this person have with coffee? Are they for real? Do they know that grind setting is one of the most important changes you have to make? It's definitely not a set and forget. Historically, grinders have had a collar with a metal thread on the top, where the burr is attached to. And then they have the second burr attached to the electric motor underneath. And on the top collar, there's a fine thread. And as you wind that down, the two burrs come closer together to give us a point where they almost touch, which is where we would have an espresso grind. And if you were to be removing that, winding it up, the space between the two burrs would be further apart, giving us a coarser grind. So that's basically the variance that you're going to have between espresso and say a filter. But you'd have to turn that collar multiple times to go all the way up to a filter, and it's very hard to get back to where you need to be for espresso. On these collars, there's usually a set of numbers that gives you a reference point. However, once the blades wear, these numbers are pretty much a waste of time because they continually to turn all the way around the collar and might end up at the very back of the grinder. So it's very easy to lose track, and if you're having to wind that multiple times, you'd have to remember how many times you've wound it up or down to get yourself back in the exact same spot. And no two grinders on the market are gonna have the same system. So if my grinder has a number 3 for espresso, you might have a totally different brand and it might be sitting on 6. So it's so hard for us to communicate that to customers, making it a long conversation time and time again with a huge number of grinders in the marketplace. Fiorenzato grinders are made in Italy. Now 80% of this grinder is actually made in-house. So that allows them to maintain the quality of the products they're putting in there, obviously the beautiful design and engineering, they've got full control over that, and they can make sure that the accuracy of their workmanship is perfect. They really have made a great looking grinder, which is beautiful Italian classic styling. So to turn the grinder on, down the bottom there's a beautiful rotation little switch. It's a really nice little switch and it will activate the display. And the first thing you see is a QR code. So if you scan that QR code, it'll take you to the Fiorenzato website. It is in Italian, so you do need to change that over to the English language. That's going to allow you to access the user manuals and all the other data that you may want to find on the machine. And if you're a tech person, that's going to give you access to all the spare parts lists that you may need as well to service the grinder. So let's start at the top of the grinder and work our way down. The hopper is a 250 gram hopper with a really nice slide. And I've found that when you've got beans in there, if you do need to close that off, it doesn't seem to jam up with beans. So that's quite handy. You've got a cover in there to reduce any popcorning, which I don't think there's a lot of popcorning happening in this grinder. And when you remove the hopper, I think it's been used on other models because there is a hole here where you could lock it in and hold it in place, but it sits really firm in there. So once it's in, it doesn't seem to move, so you don't need to have that locking screw. And the reason you're not going to have the locking screw is because of the way you can change the burr set. And this is where the engineers have just done an amazing job. Everything that's happening with this grinder. On the top here, you've got a big bean and a small bean, which tells you which way to turn the grinder for finer or coarser. Now, to be honest, that's a little bit trivial. That's something that was on old grinders, because as you change this burr set to go finer or coarser, on the top where it says espresso, mocha or filter, the front digital display is going to change in different colors so you know exactly what you're grinding. And we all know that espresso is finer and filters are far coarser. And there's a very specific range that's highlighted on the top with a whole range of little open circles, which you can adjust individually to get that exact grind that you need. Now, in the espresso section, you're going to have two options, the single cup or the double cup. And as you go across to the mocha, there's just going to be one button there that you press, and as long as you hold that, it's going to grind out the right amount of grind that you need until you let go. And the same with the filter section. You can go all the way back to the exact circle that you may have had in espresso and grind espresso again, really, really easy. This collar turns easier than any other grinder on the market. Now, I'm talking about a direct collar that's attached. Not talking about a gear system or anything like that, because they are quite super smooth. But you can literally do this very easily. It's got a beautiful silicone surround there that's got nice all ground wording in it. It actually feels really premium, because when we talk about espresso, we think we're dialing in, we want to get this really great extraction, and we want to get beautiful, juicy, thick drips, and it's something we're really focusing on. It's quite special, where typically it's been very clunky when we've had to change a collar on a grinder. It's usually very mechanical, very heavy, and not that great an experience. So that's a real pleasure to change the grind, just from a turning perspective. As you turn it, you can hear the grinder click, which means it's a stepped grinder. Now, there must be a little ball in there that's basically taking you through all of those steps. So it's not a stepless grinder, but I haven't found that to be an issue when I'm trying to grind for my espresso. And it's definitely not an issue when you're up in the filter or the mocha style settings. There's a clear little red mark on the top, which makes you line up the red arrow so that you can remove the whole burr set. Now, this is where the grinder gets super cool. So if you grab the collar and rotate that all the way clockwise, the red arrow will match up with the little red marker on the front. You'll see that the collar will start to shift a little bit and a button will pop up. If you press that button and then slightly turn that collar one more time, the whole collar removes, and then you've got access to the burr set, which you can easily remove. Now, there's no grinder on the market that can do it that quickly. That's going to expose to you the grinding chamber. And you can see here these amazing set of 64mm M340 steel blades, which is the only type of steel which is specifically designed for food safety. Then they've titanium coated them, and they've got that really beautiful rose gold finish. So that's a really nice treat to see something so beautiful inside a grinder. Now, these are going to stay sharp for 1.4 tons. Now, if we're going to do some maths on that, if you're in a cafe environment and you're doing 5 kilos of coffee a week, that's actually going to take you about 5.5 years just to use up these blades. So you take that home and you're only doing 500 grams a week, these blades are going to last you an absolute lifetime. So the moment that you remove that burr set, there's a warning safety sign that comes up really clearly on the display. So you can't hurt yourself, basically. It means that we're disengaging the motor and you can get in there and clean it. So ideally, you'd want to turn the grinder off, but at least there's a really clear indicator for safety there showing that there is a possibility you could, grind your fingers essentially. Now that it's out, you can get in there and give it a really good clean. You can see there's a little bit of grind retention in there, but we're looking at about 1 to 1.5 grams of retention that is held past that burr set through into the dosing chute. So you can easily give that a bit of a clean out or in a brush, pop it back in the burr set, pop on the collar, slightly turn it, and you'll see the button. You'll just have to press it to locate it to turn anti-clockwise, and then you can set back to the exact grind setting that you had before you decided to remove your blades. Now, as I said earlier, 80% of this grinder is made inside the Fiorenzato factory in Italy. Now, what they've done with this burr set is they have managed to get the teeth cut in a way that it actually does a fantastic espresso and filter grind. So typically we haven't been able to get one set of burrs that would do both of these very well. And when you get down into the nitty-gritty around fines and superfines or boulders and all these different variables of actual grind size, if you were to put it in sort of some microscope, you'll see there's a whole range there. But they've really made sure that this burr set can do both of them. Now, there's no doubt there's some other specific burrs on the market that will do either of them even better, but you'd have to have multiple grinders to be able to get the best out of those particular burr sets. So it's amazing to have such thought put into one set of blades and the ability to be able to change from those grind settings so easily in one grinder. The motor that powers this is a 250 watt motor, and that's going to help reduce some of the friction that's going to happen on a 64mm burr set. So it will push those grinds out pretty quickly, and there is talk about a pump, an air pump that you could put on top of your hopper that would allow you to help flush out that little bit of retention that we're seeing in this grinder. So I'm very happy with the espresso setting which I've been able to get with this grinder. And I've been using it for quite a few weeks now, and the depth of flavour that I'm getting from this burr set, the clarity and the crispness has been really great. So it's definitely not dulling down our beans. So the speed of the motor and the quality of the burrs makes those two things work, and I'm really happy with that quality. So when you're on espresso, you've got two options, which is the single cup and the double cup. And that's basically used for you to grind less or more into a single or a double portafilter handle. Now, once you press that button, it's going to activate an amount of time. And it's very easy to change that. If you just press and hold, let's say the double cup button, it will change the menu and show you how much time is allocated. And you can hit the plus or minus button very simply to increase or decrease the amount of grind that's going to end up in your portafilter. And with a simple press, you're back ready to grind again. When you activate the grind button, it's got a little time dial which shows you a cool little icon going around, which is kind of neat, and also the time is displayed on how much is left for that grind to come out. So when you turn the collar in that same menu and you get to the Mocha or the filter, you simply just press and hold that button for the amount of grind that you're after. Now in these two settings, I'd probably advise to do a pre-weigh and pre-dose into this grinder. And you just have to think about that extra 1 to 1.5 grams extra in the top, because there may be a little bit of grind retention, but that's going to allow you to get much closer to your end recipe for a Mocha pot or your filter recipe when grinding through here. Otherwise, you'd have to try and weigh that grind at the end, and as you get to a coarser grind, it gets quite fluffy and a little bit staticky, and it can go everywhere. So my advice, pre-weigh if you're going to use those options. However, Fiorenzato has thought about it, and they give you this beautiful little grinding chamber. It's got a lid on it with a silicone top, and you could grind a fair amount in there if you were heading away for a weekend and you wanted some pre-ground coffee for some pour-overs or aeropresses. It simply just seals on, and you can pop the silicone top down into itself and pop on the cap. Now, when you actually want to grind, just simply pull up this top section and it sits beautifully in place and locks straight over the grind shoe so that all of that grind ends up inside your canister. That's pretty neat. So you've just done some filter grind and you think, can I really clear that out easily to be able to get back to espresso? Well, this whole grind chute is actually held in by a magnet. You can remove that and give it a clean very easily. So that's a super smart piece of tech that we haven't had in other grinders, and I'm pretty sure that's across a lot of models on Fiorenzato as well. As you're grinding into the portafilter, there's a really solid portafilter rest and a little clip in there, and that's fully adjustable, so you could fit that to any group handle that you have. And I find that it does actually grind into the front sort of third of the actual basket, and then the grinds tend to fall back into the back edge of the grinder as it's filling up in that kind of pyramid shape. Now for me, with 22.5 grams, which is our standard recipe, I do find because it really does fluff up the grind in this grinder, there's not a lot of clumping that's happening. I tend to have to give it a little bit of a tap to make sure I can collapse that coffee so that it doesn't spill over the edges. You could simply use a dosing pot and that would solve that. Or if you've got a smaller amount of coffee, I don't think you're going to have that problem. So in terms of physical space, with the hopper on top, we're going to be 440 high. And the grinder weighs 9 kilos, so it's definitely a solid bit of kit to have on your bench, and it's not going to move around at all. In true Italian styling, there's a range of options to suit everybody. This is the matte Arctic white, which is a beautiful representation, and that's why I've got it here in my house. And then there is what they call a deep matte black. So it's kind of this satin matte, which is very stunning. Then you can get a range of timber covers that go over the display, and some of these chrome pieces can be in a stainless steel finish, a brass finish, and then you can get a stainless steel option for the whole grinder. Now there has been a partnership deal with Fiorenzato and Sanremo. So you may have seen this grinder without any sort of badging on it in a whole range of beautiful colour of the rainbow colours. Now that'll match all of the Sanremo cubes, and usually they're sold together as a set, and that's how you can get access to some matcha greens and yellows and reds and blues. There's a whole other range of colours there, but you'd have to source that ideally with your Sanremo cube, and they'll match beautifully. So as I said at the start of this review, I'm really excited about the technology and the ability to get access to this burr set, because we find with a lot of our home users and some baristas that there's this big negative around wanting to change the grind or even get access to clean out your grinder to make sure that it is working properly. And this technology of the quick release burr set is going to give that control back to the user to make sure that they are getting a good quality grind, that it's all nice and clean, and that they can reset back to the exact position they were in beforehand. We spend a lot of time teaching people to understand how to reset the burrs and get them in the right spot for espresso, and for many years people were told don't touch the grind on a grinder. But with this technology, it's going to make it so much easier. So well done Fiorenzato for changing that in our industry. So no product is perfect, but the Fiorenzato All Ground really does position itself to be a high-end quality home machine, or great for the cafe environment. And there's nothing really been changing for many years in this space. But to have them put some thought and time and energy, which costs them a lot of money, to work out how to re-engineer this blade access and the ability to clean our grinding chute, it shows their commitment to all levels of entry or home to high-end consumer grinders, that they want to make sure they're producing a great product for everyone. Now there's a big gap in the cafe industry which we've been trying to, I guess, get around for quite some time, and that is the cafe's ability to be able to grind off some retail product for the customer over the counter. So let's say you go in and have a coffee at your favourite cafe every single day, and you really want to enjoy those beans, but it's in a full 1 kilo bag. Now you can't really grind it very well with any other grinder. You'd have no idea where to go to get to a Mocha or a filter. So this now allows the cafe to be able to make that adjustment quite quickly, grind off an amount of coffee for you to take home, and then get straight back to where they were going to be making their espresso. Now, if I was a barista and I didn't have this technology and my boss asked me to make that change, I would just tell them to go away. That would be ridiculous. There's no way you could ask someone to do that on an old grinder that is an adjusting via a thread collar. It just wouldn't happen. So it opens up a lot of opportunities for cafes now to be able to sell retail products over the counter using the same blend that they're currently offering. So that's where this grinder can have a huge impact in the industry. Now, it's not a single dose grinder, and that's where this technology gets a little bit muddy, because we've got the ability to go from espresso, mocha and filter, but there's a little bit of grind retention and we have a big hopper. So typically a filter grinder would be a zero retention grinder, allowing you to put lots of small amounts of coffee in and changing from a decaf, a blend or your favorite single origin very easily with no grind retention. So it's hard to sort of really position this grinder against the competition, because they will do that side very well, but they won't have a hopper and they won't have an easy guide for you to reference what grind setting you should be on. So it's kind of sitting in a mix between the two worlds that makes it quite unique. The biggest thing to consider is that if you do have this hopper full of beans and you're going to be grinding from espresso and then heading up to mocha or filter, and you want to make your way back to espresso, you really need to be managing how many beans are under the hopper slide. And my advice is to know what that amount is and clear that out for espressos first before you start to go and change some grinds, because you can't go back to espresso from filter without purging some of the grind as you're adjusting that collar. The top burr set will clamp on the bottom burr set and it will stop the grinder from working. Now that's not going to be different on any other grinder, it's the same problem we're going to have. So just remember to keep purging as you're going finer back to espresso and you won't have that problem. So for me, this grinder really does fit in that high-end home market or entry-level grinder for a cafe. And there's just packed full of features which we don't see in other grinders. So well done Fiorenzato for re-engineering the humble domestic high-end coffee grinder and allowing people like myself to have flexibility in grind and not having to buy multiple grinders in a confined space in our home. So if you've got any questions about the Fiorenzato all ground, hey, leave it down the bottom. I'd love to answer those for you. I hope this has given you an idea as to whether this grinder is going to suit you in your home environment or the cafe. So thanks very much for watching. Catch you next time. Cheers.